If you're not a good reader and you're at school, it's an uphill battle. But what do we know if we take those same children and we take them out of that environment and we put them in an environment where they can be successful, where they feel recognized for the things that they can do? They come alive. They feel more comfortable making an effort, trying to do things that previously had been very frightening to them, like trying to read. When we begin to recognize that the shortcoming almost always is in the learning environment and not something that resides solely within the child, that's the point at which we can begin to bring about the kinds of instructional change that lead to better learning and children who can then begin to rewrite an internal script, one that says, I am a capable learner. In fact, I like learning. I like trying to read, because when I try to read with this reading teacher, I feel confident. I feel successful. I am learning. And indeed, we now know that emotion and cognition, thought processes, are deeply related. And we must approach education in a way that takes both into account, the emotional state, not just the cognitive state, because that's when we have an opportunity to really help children progress and engage and flourish. These kids want to do well, are capable of doing well, and can do well when they're provided with the type of support that takes into account that learning, at its best, is the outcome of social interaction. That when we approach instruction, learning to read and write, learning to spell, learning math, learning concepts in science, history, even foreign language, works well when we approach instruction from the standpoint of social interaction, primarily one-on-one, because that's where we have the opportunity to adjust the level of support and to correct where there's misunderstanding, to provide opportunities for repetition, to offer strategies for understanding a concept or remembering information. And these strategies and these principles of education are crucial to helping students with a wide range of learning and behavioral differences. When someone feels heard, they feel understood. And unfortunately, a lot of kids don't feel heard. They do not feel understood. And the way we can help is to listen and to not judge, to find ways to affirm their view. It may not necessarily be what other people want them to be thinking, but when we start from a point of affirmation, then you can begin to establish communication. But communication, meaningful communication, is born out of a belief that someone is being listened to. If a student has not turned in their homework 40 days in a row, is there any reason to think they're going to hand it in on the 41st day? Yet, this is the assumption that's often made, that somehow, magically, some pattern, well-established pattern, is suddenly going to reverse. If we're just sitting on our hands and waiting for the things to turn around, all we're doing is reinforcing something that no one, especially the student, wants to have happen, which is do poorly, underperform. There's a tendency to expect students to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, demonstrate some grit, without trying to contextualize what they really need, which is a level of support that only works well in the context of a healthy, positive relationship. The human brain is a social organ. It only functions well in a social context. So we need to ask, why is it we expect students to perform well totally on their own, independently? It's very unclear to me why independence in of itself needs to be a primary objective of our instructional practices. I start every conversation with a new student in my practice this way. I'm going to ask you a question completely out of the blue. And I say, are you ready? And they say, yes. And I'll say, have you ever heard of a shooting star before? And almost all kids, frankly, all kids I've ever met, all say, yeah, I've heard of a shooting star. And then I quickly say, a shooting star isn't actually a star, because you want to preempt any possible mistake a student might make, because a student might think that a shooting star is actually a star. So before we lead them astray, we want to clarify the direction of the conversation. Now, most kids will say, oh, I know that. I know a shooting star isn't really a star. And I'll say, oh, that's great. That's right. And then I'll say, what do you know about shooting stars? Or meteors, which is a technical name, I'll say. And they'll say, oh, I know all about meteors. And often they do. Or often they'll say, oh, really? A shooting star is called a meteor? And I'll say, yes. Isn't that interesting? And I'll say, rub your hands together. And they'll start going like this. I say, good. I say, faster. And they'll go faster. And they'll say, what do you feel? And they say, heat. And I'll say, fantastic. How come? And it's amazing. So many children know, even very young children, they know the word friction. Sometimes I'll say, I don't know. I don't know why I feel. And it leads to a great conversation about friction. Oh, it's something called friction. Whenever two things rub past one another, they tend to generate heat. And at any rate, they generate so much heat, these little bits of metal and rock, that they heat up to about 4,000 degrees, and they leave a streak of light in the night sky. And it looks like a star, but it's not a star at all. It's these little bits of metal and rock. Almost always, a shooting star will burn up in the night sky. But every now and then, it's very, very rare, every now and then a shooting star will actually land on the earth. And it's very, very rare, but occasionally someone will actually find one. And it so happens, I have one here. And I show them my shooting star, my meteorite. And they go like that. And I hand it to them, and they take it. And it's a wonderful moment because it creates the connection that we need to then have a conversation.